Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1908. Baroness Beatrice Valentin adjusted the heavy pearl combs in her hair and gazed through the palace window. Below, the imperial gardens of Schönbrunn stretched out like a tapestry of geometric perfection, each hedge and flower bed precisely arranged according to designs that had barely changed in 2 centuries. Archduke Franz Ferdinand would arrive within the hour, and her father, Baron Valentin, had made it abundantly clear that this meeting was not merely social. At 23, Beatrice understood what was expected of her as the daughter of a minor but ambitious noble family in the twilight years of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The roses are particularly vibrant this season, her lady's maid observed, adjusting Beatrice's pale blue gown. Yes, Beatrice replied absently, her attention caught by a figure moving between the hedgerows. A man, tall and lean, was carefully tending to a climbing rose that had broken free of its trellis. His movements were deliberate, almost tender as he guided the errant stems back to their proper place. "Who is that?" she asked, her breath leaving a small circle of condensation on the glass. The maid peered out. "One of the new gardeners, I believe. The head gardener's apprentice. They say he studied botanical sciences at the university before coming here." A university man working as a gardener? His father was a gardener here before him. Family tradition, I suppose. Though they say this one has ideas about modernizing the imperial gardens. The maid's tone suggested what she thought of such presumption. Beatrice watched as the man stepped back to admire his work, then moved on to the next task, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. There was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his humble station. "Come away from the window, Baroness. We must finish your preparations." Beatrice complied, but her thoughts remained in the garden below. Conrad Novak felt the weight of scrutiny upon his back and glanced up at the palace windows. A pale face quickly withdrew from view. He smiled to himself as he continued pruning the climbing roses. After 3 months at Schönbrunn, he had grown accustomed to being observed by the palace inhabitants. To them, he was merely part of the scenery, no more remarkable than the marble statues that lined the garden paths. "Novak," the voice of Herr Weber, the imperial head gardener, cut through his reverie. "The orangery needs attention. Some of the citrus trees are showing signs of scale. See to it immediately." "Yes, Herr Weber." Conrad gathered his tools and headed toward the glass-walled building that housed the emperor's prized collection of exotic plants. Inside the orangery, the air was thick with moisture and the scent of orange blossoms. Conrad moved methodically among the potted trees, examining leaves for the telltale signs of infestation. His father had taught him to recognize the early stages of plant diseases long before he'd studied botany at the university. Now those 2 educations merged, the practical wisdom of generations of gardeners enhanced by scientific understanding. He heard the door open behind him but didn't turn, assuming it was one of the other gardeners. "Is it true you studied at the university?" The voice, female and refined, startled him. He turned to find himself facing a young woman in an elegant blue gown, her dark hair swept up in an intricate style. He recognized her immediately from court occasions he had observed from a distance, Baroness Valentin, daughter of one of the emperor's advisors. Conrad straightened, conscious of the soil under his fingernails. "Yes, Baroness. Botanical sciences. And yet you choose to work here, with your hands." It wasn't a question, but there was curiosity rather than condescension in her tone. "I find theory without practice to be hollow." He gestured to the orange trees. "One can read about plants for years and still fail to understand them without this." He held up his soil-stained hands. She stepped closer, examining the leaf he had been inspecting. "Is it ill?" "Beginning to be. See these small bumps? Scale insects. Left untreated, they'll weaken the tree." "And how will you heal it?" Conrad found himself explaining the treatment, surprised by her genuine interest. She asked intelligent questions, occasionally lifting a leaf herself to examine it more closely. "You should not be here alone with me, Baroness," he finally said, aware of the impropriety of their conversation. "No," she agreed with a small smile. "But I've always found rules to be most interesting at their boundaries." She took a step back. "Thank you for the lesson, Herr Novak. How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know things, especially about people who intrigue me." With that, She turned and left the orangery, the scent of her perfume lingering among the citrus blooms. The following weeks brought unusual June rains to Vienna, keeping Beatrice confined to the palace during her family's extended stay at Schönbrunn. Her father's diplomatic duties had intensified with rumors of unrest in the Balkans, and the Valentins had been granted apartments in the palace's guest wing. This proximity to the imperial family was precisely what Baron Valentin had been working toward for years, but Beatrice found herself looking out at the rain-drenched gardens more often than attending to the social opportunities presented. When the skies finally cleared, she seized her chance. With a book as her excuse, she slipped away from her lady's maid and made her way to the gardens. The recent rains had left everything lush and vibrant, the formal parterres gleaming in the morning light. Beatrice walked purposefully toward the orangery, but found it empty save for a young apprentice who informed her that her Novak was working in the Neptune fountain garden. She found him kneeling beside a bed of irises, carefully dividing the rhizomes with a small knife. He looked up at the sound of her approach, surprise registering briefly before he stood and bowed. Baroness Valentin. Herr Novak, I've been reading about plant propagation. She held up a botanical text. I thought perhaps you might show me how it's done in practice. A smile touched his lips. Is that the only reason you sought me out? Beatrice felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Is there another reason I should have? Perhaps you find the company of gardeners more honest than that of courtiers. She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. Perhaps I do. Will you show me what you're doing with those irises? For the next hour, Conrad demonstrated the proper technique for dividing the iris rhizomes, explaining how each piece would grow into a new plant. Beatrice knelt beside him on a gardener's pad he insisted she used to protect her dress, her gloves set aside despite propriety, her fingers tentatively touching the soil under his guidance. The earth remembers, he said quietly as they worked. Every season, every change. People think gardens are made anew each year, but they carry their histories in the soil, in the seeds that wait for the right moment to emerge. Like empires, she said thoughtfully, appearing solid and unchanging, but always carrying the seeds of what they might become. Conrad looked at her with new respect. Yes, exactly like that. A shadow fell across them, and Beatrice looked up to see her father's secretary standing stiffly on the garden path. Baroness, your father requests your presence immediately. The Archduke has arrived early. Beatrice rose quickly, brushing soil from her hands. Thank you, I'll come at once. As the secretary turned to leave, Conrad handed her the book she had set aside. Your reading material, Baroness. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Beatrice felt a current of awareness pass between them. Thank you, Herr Novak, for the practical demonstration. As she hurried back to the palace, she realized she had left her gloves behind, but there was no time to retrieve them. The summer heat intensified as July progressed, bringing with it a steady stream of royal visitors and diplomatic functions. Conrad caught glimpses of Baroness Valentin at outdoor receptions, always surrounded by appropriate company, always seemingly engaged in the social dance of the aristocracy. Yet sometimes, when he was working near the palace windows, he would look up to find her watching him, their gazes meeting briefly before protocol reasserted itself. One evening, as he was finishing his work in the private imperial rose garden, a place typically off-limits to all but the royal family and their invited guests, he heard footsteps on the gravel path. You've extended your working hours, Herr Novak. Conrad turned to find Beatrice standing at the entrance to the garden, a shawl draped over her evening dress. The emperor requested additional attention to his prize bourbon roses, he explained, setting down his pruning shears. They're suffering in this heat. As are we all, she said, stepping further into the garden. I escaped from a musical evening that seemed determined to last until dawn. She moved to examine one of the roses. They're beautiful, despite their suffering. Beauty often comes at a cost. Conrad was acutely aware that they were alone, the rest of the palace distracted by the evening's entertainment. You shouldn't be here, Baroness. I know. She looked up at him, the moonlight silvering her features. I found myself thinking of our conversation about irises, about how things wait beneath the surface, biding their time. What are you waiting for, Baroness Valentin? She touched a rose petal gently. I'm not certain anymore. Before coming to Schönbrunn, I thought I understood my path. Now I find myself questioning certainties I once took for granted. Because of conversations with a gardener? Because of conversations with a man who sees the world differently than those I've known. She met his gaze directly. My father wishes me to encourage the Archduke's attention. It would be advantageous for our family. And what do you wish? Conrad asked, taking a step closer. To understand why I find more meaning in discussions about plant propagation than in all the political machinations of the court. She smiled ruefully. Hardly the ambition of a properly raised baroness. Perhaps you're more suited to cultivation than decoration. What a scandalous suggestion. But her eyes were bright with amusement. Oh, I nearly forgot. She reached into a small pocket hidden in the folds of her dress. My gloves. I've been carrying them with me, waiting for an opportunity to return them properly. Conrad took the gloves, the fine leather soft against his calloused hands. You could have sent a servant. And missed the opportunity to see the Emperor's private roses? Never. She glanced back toward the palace, where music could still be heard. I should return before I'm missed. Yes, you should. Neither of them moved. Conrad, she said, using his given name for the first time. If I were to come to the orangery tomorrow, after the midday meal, would you be there? Yes, he answered simply. I would. The orangery became their sanctuary over the following weeks. Under the pretext of botanical study, Beatrice would bring books and notebooks, and they would spend stolen hours discussing everything from Mendel's theories of inheritance to the political tensions rippling through the empire. Conrad shared his vision for gardens that combined beauty with scientific understanding, while Beatrice confided her growing disillusionment with the narrow expectations placed upon women of her station. My mother was different before she married, she told him one afternoon as they examined a rare orchid he was nurturing. She painted, wrote poetry. Now she concerns herself only with social connections and proper appearances. And you fear the same fate? I fear waking up 20 years from now and not recognizing myself. She touched the orchid's delicate bloom. These grow in the wild, don't they? Clinging to trees in distant forests. Yes, they're epiphytes. They take nothing from their hosts but a place to anchor themselves. That's all I want, really. Not to be kept like these hothouse specimens, but to find my own place to grow. She looked at him, her expression vulnerable. Is that foolish? No, he said softly. It's the most natural desire in the world. Their hands met over the orchid, fingers intertwining with deliberate intent. The touch, simple as it was, felt momentous, a crossing of boundaries more significant than any royal decree. Beatrice, he began, but the sound of the orangery door opening caused them to step apart quickly. Her Weber entered, looking between them with narrowed eyes. Baroness, your lady's maid is searching for you. And Novak, the head gardener at the Belvedere, is here to consult about the new shipment of Asiatic specimens. Thank you, Herr Weber. I was just leaving. Beatrice gathered her books, her composure impeccable, though her heart raced. Thank you for explaining the propagation techniques, Herr Novak. It has been most educational. As she left, Herr Weber fixed Conrad with a stern look. Educational, indeed. Be careful, Novak. Men in our position can't afford to forget our place. I know my place perfectly well, Conrad replied, turning his attention to the orchid. Do you? Because the Baron has plans for his daughter that certainly don't include a gardener, university education, or not. Conrad said nothing, but the warning settled heavily in his chest. August brought stifling heat and mounting tensions, both political and personal. Beatrice found herself increasingly included in discussions about potential matches, with the Archduke showing particular interest. Her father was jubilant, seeing in this attention the culmination of years of careful social maneuvering. You've caught his eye, my dear, Baron Valentin told her one evening as they prepared for yet another formal dinner. A few more months of cultivating his interest, and we might speak of a spring engagement. Beatrice felt something cold settle in her stomach. Father, the Archduke is 20 years my senior and has a reputation for appreciating beautiful, well-bred young women from loyal families, her father interrupted. His attention is an honor, Beatrice, one that could secure our family's position for generations. She thought of Conrad's hands, strong and gentle as they worked with living things, so different from the bejeweled fingers of the Archduke that had lingered too long on her wrist during their last encounter. I'm not certain my heart lies in that direction, she said carefully. Her father's expression hardened. Your heart is not the organ of concern in this matter. Your duty is. Remember your position, Beatrice. That night, unable to sleep, she wrote a letter to Conrad, pouring out her fears and frustrations. She sealed it with a pressed petal from one of the orangery flowers and gave it to a kitchen maid she had befriended, with instructions to deliver it discreetly. The reply came the next day, tucked inside a botanical text returned to her by the same maid. Dearest Beatrice, your words touch me deeply. I too have been thinking of duty and position, those invisible chains that bind us to paths others have chosen. But I have also been thinking of grafting, how one life can be joined to another, creating something new and stronger than either could be alone. Meet me tomorrow at dawn in the Roman ruins. There is something I must show you. Yours. Conrad. The fabricated ruins, built a century earlier to satisfy an imperial taste for classical aesthetics, stood in the eastern section of the gardens, rarely visited in the early hours. Beatrice slipped out before sunrise, telling her maid she needed air to help with a headache. The morning mist hung low over the grounds as she made her way through the gardens, her heart quickening with each step. Conrad was waiting, a lantern in his hand casting a warm glow in the gathering dawn light. At the sight of her, his serious expression melted into a smile that transformed his face. You came, he said simply. Did you doubt I would? No, not you. He offered his hand. Come. What I want to show you is just beyond the ruins. He led her to a section of the garden she had never noticed before, hidden behind tall hedges. Unlike the formal parterres and geometric patterns of the main gardens, this space seemed almost wild, with plants growing in naturalistic groupings. What is this place? She asked, enchanted by the contrast to the rigid formality of the rest of Schönbrunn. My experiment. Herr Weber allowed me this small plot to test new ideas. These plants are arranged as they might grow in nature, companions supporting each other rather than being forced into artificial patterns. Beatrice moved among the plants, recognizing species from their discussions, native wildflowers alongside carefully selected cultivars, all thriving together. It's beautiful, she said softly, so different from the rest of the gardens. This is how I believe gardens should be, working with nature's wisdom rather than imposing our will upon it. He took her hands in his. Beatrice, I know what I am about to say is presumptuous beyond measure, but I cannot remain silent any longer. I have fallen in love with you. Though the words were no surprise, hearing them spoken aloud sent a tremor through her. Conrad, please, let me finish. I have nothing to offer you that would be considered worthy by your family's standards. I am merely a gardener with ideas that most consider radical. But I see you, truly see you, and I believe you see me as well. I do, she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. And I have fallen in love with you too. But my father has plans that don't include me. I know. He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. I'm being offered a position at the Botanical Gardens in Prague. The director there is interested in my theories about naturalistic planting. I leave at the end of the month. The news struck her like a physical blow. So soon. I've delayed accepting as long as I could, hoping. He shook his head. It was foolish to hope. No. Beatrice squared her shoulders, a new resolve forming within her. Hope is never foolish. Nor is love, no matter how impossible it seems. She stepped closer to him. I don't want the life my father has planned for me. I want a life of meaning, of growth. With you. Conrad's expression was pained. What you're suggesting is scandalous, improper, and completely contrary to everything I've been raised to value. She smiled through her tears. And it's the only thing that makes sense to me now. The first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, illuminating the garden in golden light. Without further words, Conrad drew her into his arms, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning. In that moment, surrounded by his garden of companions, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place to grow. The news broke like a summer storm, sudden and transformative. The Baroness Valentin, daughter of one of the emperor's trusted advisors, had eloped with a palace gardener. The scandal rippled through Viennese society, becoming the only topic of conversation at soirees and diplomatic functions throughout the empire. Baron Valentin publicly disowned his daughter, declaring her dead to the family. The Archduke's interest quickly transferred to another suitable young noblewoman. And in the gardens of Schönbrunn, her Weber assigned a new apprentice to care for the emperor's roses, never mentioning the small experimental plot behind the Roman ruins, which he quietly maintained himself. But scandals, like summer storms, eventually pass. By the winter of 1909, Vienna had found new subjects for gossip, and the affair of the Baroness and the gardener faded into the background of collective memory. Prague, 1913. The Botanical Gardens' new naturalistic section had become something of a sensation, drawing visitors from across Europe to witness what the newspapers were calling revolutionary garden design. The director, initially skeptical of Conrad Novak's theories, now proudly guided special guests through the winding paths where plants grew in harmonious communities rather than regimented rows. In a small cottage at the garden's edge, Beatrice Novak adjusted her son's collar before sending him off to help his father with the morning's work. At 4 years old, little Alexander already showed a keen interest in plants, carefully examining leaves and flowers with his father's methodical attention to detail. "Will we see the emperor today, Mama?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "Yes, darling. He's coming specially to see Papa's gardens." She smoothed his dark hair, so like Conrad's. "Remember your manners when he arrives." Emperor Franz Joseph's visit to the Prague Botanical Gardens was officially a diplomatic gesture acknowledging Czech cultural institutions. Unofficially, it was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated reconciliation, arranged through the persistent efforts of Beatrice's mother, who had never truly accepted her husband's decree of family separation. As Beatrice watched her son run toward Conrad, who lifted the boy onto his shoulders with practiced ease, she felt a profound sense of peace. The path had not been easy. The first years in Prague had been lean, their small apartment barely adequate, her adjustment to life without servants and social position more challenging than she had anticipated. There had been nights of tears and doubt, moments when the weight of all she had surrendered threatened to crush her spirits. But there had also been joy, profound, everyday joy, the satisfaction of creating a home with her own hands. The wonder of watching Conrad's theories gain acceptance and respect. The miracle of Alexander's birth, bringing with him a love so fierce and protective it transformed her understanding of what mattered in life. And gradually, there had been healing. Letters from her mother, at first secret and tentative, then more regular. A visit from her younger sister, who arrived in disguise and left declaring that Beatrice had made the right choice. Even her father, though he never wrote directly, had begun to make inquiries about their welfare through intermediaries. Now, with the emperor's visit, a formal acknowledgement seemed possible. Not forgiveness. She had done nothing that required forgiveness, but recognition that her choice, though unconventional, had merit. Conrad approached with Alexander still perched on his shoulders. "Everything is ready," he said, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. "The director says the imperial party will arrive within the hour." Beatrice straightened his tie and brushed a bit of soil from his jacket. "They will be impressed. Your work speaks for itself." "Our work," he corrected, taking her hand. "I would never have had the courage to pursue these ideas without you beside me." A carriage arrived, and Beatrice's breath caught as her mother stepped out, elegant as always in a traveling suit of deep blue. They had not seen each other in person for over 2 years. "Grandmother," Alexander called out, scrambling down from his father's shoulders and running toward the carriage. Baroness Valentin knelt, propriety forgotten, to embrace her grandson. Over the boy's head, her eyes met Beatrice's, filled with tears and something that looked remarkably like pride. Later, after the emperor had toured the gardens and expressed his admiration for Conrad's innovative approaches, after formal photographs had been taken for the newspapers, after Alexander had charmed the entire imperial party with his earnest explanations of plant companions, the family gathered in the cottage garden for a private tea. "Your father sends his regards," Baroness Valentin said quietly as she sat beside Beatrice on the small terrace. "He's too stubborn to come himself, but he asked for details about your life here. About Alexander. And what will you tell him?" Beatrice asked, watching as Conrad showed her father's secretary the new propagation techniques they had developed. "The truth, that you have created something remarkable, that your husband's work is changing how people think about cultivation, that your son is the brightest child I've ever encountered." She took Beatrice's hand. "That you were right, my dear, to follow your heart." Beatrice felt tears threaten, I never wanted to hurt him. Or you. I know. And he knows too, though he'll never admit it. Her mother's smile was tinged with sadness. The world is changing, Beatrice. The old certainties, the rigid hierarchies, they're crumbling bit by bit. Your father feels it, fears it. But you and Conrad, you're building something for the world that's coming. The evening light gilded the garden, turning the cottage windows to gold. Conrad looked up, meeting Beatrice's gaze across the terrace, his smile as warm and steady as the day they had met in the orangery 5 years before. Alexander ran between them, a living bridge connecting their separate worlds. In that moment, Beatrice understood that what had begun as a forbidden love had grown into something much more profound. A life cultivated with care and intention, taking root in fertile soil, reaching toward the light.